Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I have got some crazy good bullish news for precious metals today. Thank you, Jimmy, for calling in. Mr. Jimmy gave me this information I didn't know. But Wyoming is going to be receiving gold and silver in the form of their tax payments. Check this out. Wyoming Senate votes to hold, invest, and receive tax payments in gold and silver. Now, I've got a 20-minute clip recorded, and I encourage everybody to watch it because this is history being unfolded in front of our own eyes. Now, this isn't the only state that's looking at it. They passed it through the Senate, but Alaska, Missouri, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee, and more after passing the Senate. Several other states are considering their own sound money bill this month. So this is bullish, guys. This is, you should listen. I really do. I want you to listen to the video because they're talking about the Thunderdome. They're talking about the collapse of the dollar. These are elected officials. I mean, I get excited when I see people getting ready, getting prepared. That just means the people of Wyoming might not be part of the problem, It's File 101 prompts the Wyoming State Treasurer to create a formal system to deal directly in constitutional money, not fake fiat currency that's supposed to be illegal. A system that would also include holding gold as an asset to help the cowboy state hedge against high exposure to Federal Reserve note dollars and potentially invest in precious metals. I'm going to roll the clip. Watch the whole thing. You can watch them think through it. They're trying to wrap their mind around it. They don't say Thunderdome, but that's what they're thinking. You can tell they're worried about it. Now, I'm not looking forward to the Thunderdome at all, but it's cool to see people get prepared. Gold and silver's not going to save us, but it will help as the currency crashes. And it's just nice to be able to see states in the United States moving in that direction. So let me know what you think, guys. Have an awesome, awesome day. Later.
Wyoming Legal Tender Act amendments sponsored by Senator Ide, an act relating to the Wyoming Legal Tender Act.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like us to think about this a little bit, Mr. President. The Boy Scout motto was always be prepared. And I think this is a bill about preparation. And it's a bill that's thinking about preparing for a time when our currency might be worthless. Perhaps our government is in chaos. Perhaps anarchy reigns in our capital city. And yet we want to, as this bill was originally written, to be able to force the state of Wyoming to take specie, gold and silver, for payment of taxes. That's really not an easy thing to do. It says that the fiscal impact is indeterminate, Mr. Chairman, and the bill has been amended to be the product of mind severance. But I think this is really about preparing Wyoming for the future, the chaos, when democracy melts down and our currency is worthless. But there's problems with it, Mr. President. One of them has to do with just thinking about gold. Everybody likes to think that gold is so great. Gold is a store of value. It holds its value relatively well. I concede that. But it's a very volatile value, Mr. President. And it's, in ancient times, you'd carry your gold around and you were very vulnerable. Someone could steal your gold. It was heavy. They had to keep track of it. You had your little piece of that football field of gold. And so we developed a banking system that lets you travel to a city and have the funds with you that you could write on, or you could withdraw funds there. Modern banking system is a wonderful thing. Doesn't mean it's always right. It doesn't mean governments can't mess it up. Certainly inflation. We've heard about inflation. We have inflation now in the United States for the first time in a significant amount in many years. We have a strong currency. We're spending too much, but our currency is the envy of the world. Trouble with gold is if you have it in an expectation that it's going to increase in value. So you're not going to trade it for something that you think is going to go down in value, like a dollar denomination. And if you have an entity like the state of Wyoming that has to take payment in dollars, we don't have a choice around that. Why would you give up your gold, which you expect to increase, to pay a debt in dollars, which they have to take? You'd rather keep your gold, Mr. President. Trouble is, to force it on someone is expensive. I walked through the corridor this morning. I saw those safes downstairs. I'm thinking about filling those things up with gold again and locking those doors, those shiny doors that are all painted. And it's kind of a cool thought, but it's not easy. It's not fungible. You have to deal with dealers, and they take discounts, and it's just an enormously difficult thing. And despite what you think, gold doesn't always hold its value. It is a volatile commodity, like every other commodity. It has some apparent value in our mind because it's so magical. It was created in supernova explosions billions of years ago, you know, as matter is converted into heavier elements. Couldn't even happen in our own sun. Our own sun has to stop at Harvard. But other stars, if they're heavy enough and big enough, and there's these massive things, they can go farther. They can get to gold, uranium. Pretty cool stuff. Billions of years old. But what are we prepping for? We're prepping for the chaos of democratic failure, where people take over the government and we fall apart. We have to rely, we'll have our guns and we'll hide in our basements and we'll keep track of our gold because that's the way we're going to eat, I guess. This is a very expensive proposition. It'd be very difficult to implement. And I believe this country is going to make it. I'm going to be there.
Thank you. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against this bill. You know, from the get-go, I just thought it was not a workable solution. Number one, unless we decide to hold gold, it doesn't do us any good. And we don't. When people pay their taxes, what do we do with it? We redistribute it to our counties and cities. We pay for healthcare. We pay for our schools. We pay for all sorts of things. Yes, we do invest as well. We put it in the Permanent Metal Fund Trust. We put it in whatever trust funds we have, and we do save. We put it in the LISRA account as well. The problem is if we're going to take gold, then our intent should be to hold it. We actually been investing our monies. Certainly, some people can say gold isn't an investment. I tend to believe what my colleague back in the corner mentioned, that investment is very, very volatile. I think much more so than the investments that we're doing right now. And I don't think it's the intent of our treasurer or the policy of the state to invest in gold and to hold gold. Yes, we could hold gold. We wouldn't hold it in our state. We would hold it in some depository somewhere in New York, in Idaho, or wherever they have depositories. And in chaos, if indeed we're holding it because someday the dollar will go away and we'll be in chaos, I'm not so sure that we'll be able to get to our gold. So anyhow, I just see it as an unworkable policy. Don't think that anyone will be, any of the severance taxes will be paid in gold. And so I think it's going to be a lot of work to prepare to take it for an eventuality, in my mind, that will never happen. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I stand in support of this bill. You know, there may come a time when this bill will help beyond what we all know. And I think all of you remember how close we were in 2008 to financial crisis. Time makes us forget those crises. I'm one of those individuals who happen to believe that this very well could happen again, particularly when we see in Washington what's being spent. So I would ask the body to look very closely at this bill. I think it is needed, and I think it deserves our consideration, and I intend to vote for it.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the bill. I don't know a lot about gold and investments and the like, but I don't believe we, the legislature, will be dealing with the gold and how it'll be handled, how it'll be stored. It'll be our treasurer, and it appears that he seems to want to join in on this. So I think we should pass the bill and let him deal with the details of the matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we as legislature have worked with the state treasurer to develop an investment fund committee. These are professionals who have invested funds for many years, and we are relying on them to make the right investments for our state. And quite honestly, Mr. President, when I review what they've invested in, not one time have they invested in gold. So to me, what would happen is if we accept those payments in gold, the state treasurer, to meet the investment fund committee's objectives, would have to immediately sell that gold and convert it to dollars. So, Mr. President, I don't think this bill makes sense. I think we should continue to rely on our experts in our state treasurers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, on and for the bill, but let me give you a reason why. And my colleague from Fremont County talked about the dark and, you know, the looming world collapse. So, Mr. Chairman, from 1870 to 1820s, gold was the currency that was recognized around every world. All the countries printed their currency, and it was the gold standard, and it was an international gold standard. And then we talk about the volatility of gold. And then the 1930s come along and the federal government abolished the ability of private citizens to own gold. And you know why, Mr. President? Because the US currency collapsed. The Great Depression. And so we confiscated. We actually made it illegal to own gold in this country because we were afraid because the US dollar wasn't worth anything, right? So that went on. And then we got to 1971. And still the gold standard was on the books, Mr. Chairman, but we had a presidential order because the dollar was pegged to the value of gold. Even though they confiscated it, made it illegal to own it, we were still on the gold standard technically. And the reason that the president at the time got rid of the gold standard is because it was pegged to gold, the value of gold. And we could not print money and spend money because it was pegged to the value of gold. So the only way for the United States government to be able to start printing money, because we didn't own enough gold at the time, even though, Mr. President, today, the #1 holder of gold in the world, United States of America, 8.1 tons of gold in the US government treasuries vaults. Mr. Chairman, it's been a long recognized standard. It's probably less volatile than the dollar over a long period of time. It's a recognized, like you can go anywhere in the world and transact, whether it's a gold Krugerrand, a Philharmonic, a Maple Leaf, Australian dollars, we still have around the world currencies that are printed. Our US government prints gold currency today you can buy from the US Mint, Mr. President. So who owns the most gold? The United States government. Why don't we just get rid of it? It's not worth anything. Who owns the next most gold? The European Union, the bloc countries. Who's buying the most gold? China, Russia. Why? Because always when governments collapse, they revolt back to gold and silver as a long standard. Mr. Chairman, I don't think we're going to see people overwhelming the Treasurer's office for the very reasons that my friends said. It's because most people are going to hold it because of the US dollar is more likely to collapse than the value of gold. It's just recognized as a long-standing tradition to be able to do transactions with gold and silver. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. Glad we had to have this discussion, or glad we got to have this discussion today. You know, the intent of this bill is, for the most part, to give the treasurer another asset class to invest in, give him specific authority. There's not a whole lot of downside in protecting against inflation with gold. You know, the dollar, since the Federal Reserve came into existence in 1913, the dollar's lost, anybody, you know, you see a lot of different numbers, 96 to 98% of its value. And as the story I gave you earlier in general file was, you know, if you had a 1 ounce coin, you could buy a good suit. It was worth $20 back 100 years ago. And today you can still buy that. Over time, gold retains its value. And this is an insurance policy for a lot of money that we're responsible for here. I mean, I know over the past few years, we've had, you know, investments in third world debt, emerging market debt that we've been crushed on. We've been crushed on bonds this year. There's no counterparty risk with gold. Gold isn't a debt to somebody else. Everything else, all of this paper fiat currency is. And all this is intended to do is give us, the treasurer, another tool in the toolbox to defend ourselves against inflation, which is ravaging the world right now. And, you know, gold's been money for 5,000 years. It's the money that people, the free market money that they decide to use. It wasn't picked by government. It was picked by the free market deciding what's the best money to use and in, you know, doing transactions. And I think that a lot of the fears here, I mean, there's a Grisham's law that says that bad money drives out good, and those comments were made today. I don't think people are really going to make their payments in gold. It's you know, it's only for mineral taxes, and you know, as far as the requirement, I mean, the treasurer could effectively own one ounce coin, and he would be in compliance basically with. So it's not like we're forcing them to buy a certain amount of gold. It just gives them another tool to hedge against what's going on right now, and it could get worse. So with that, the good senator from Baggs gave an eloquent description of why we use gold. And, you know, there was those dates that he gave you, 1870, I had a few little different ones, but I've looked at it too. About the end of 1920, there was literally no inflation when we were on the gold standard. It was just a flat line. Your money for that 50-year period of time would effectively buy you the same basket of goods 70 years later or 50 years later. So that's all I'm trying to do here. There's really, it doesn't look like there's any expense to the state on this. It just allows the treasurer to get the plumbing in place to be prepared, as the comments were made. So with that, I'll rest here, and thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no further debate. So.
Senate File 101, 16 aye, 15 no.
One more, 1650. 16-15, you said?
Yes, sir. 16 aye, 15 no.
Senate File 101, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act amendments has passed the Senate. Congratulations, Senator Ide. First one out.